歡迎收睇美國專訊。加州棕櫚泉郊外有一個私人度假勝地，名叫做陽光之鄉 Sunnylands。多年嚟，佢係國際外交嘅一個重要場所。下邊係記者杜洛嘅介紹。
Walter and Leonore Annenberg were both American diplomats, and they were philanthropists. And in 1963, they decided to build a marvelous mid-century home here in the desert. They paired up with A. Quincy Jones, who was a famous architect in Southern California and beyond that, and they designed this masterpiece. When they designed this house, they were not yet diplomats. They were successful publishers. They were a very wealthy power couple. What happened was they built this home for themselves, and as the history of the home unfolded, with one of their first guests being President Eisenhower, and it just snowballed from there. One dignitary came after another, and they saw the power of place here. They saw their friends coming out of Washington, D.C., and other places in the world, and coming to this tranquil environment. And they saw really interesting conversations happen here. And then later it became a more conscious effort to use this property for diplomatic outreach. For instance, it was actually Mr. Annenberg who introduced Ronald Reagan to Margaret Thatcher. That became a very famous pairing and a powerful pairing through the 80s. It impacted policy, across the pond, so to speak. What the Annenbergs wished for their property after their residency was that we continue to provide what they naturally provided and make the home a place to gather people who have impact in the world for the greater good, really to bring peace to the world. That was their goal. And so they asked us to do the same, to bring important people to the property, to be in the home, to relax and have important conversations. One of our recent guests was President Obama during his term, and he brought to the property Chinese President Xi Jinping. President Trump did not opt to use the property, but it certainly was available to him. As a presidential retreat, President Biden is more than welcome to plan meetings here, and we would welcome him and his administration as we would any president.
一名歷史小說作家成為咗製作銅器嘅工匠，原因係佢喺進行寫作研究題材嘅時候激起咗佢嘅興趣。下邊記者艾爾瑪斯利嘅介紹。
As far as I can tell and find, I am the only woman building copper cookware from scratch, both the vintage ways and a more modern rendition of copper cookware. I had never taken a shop class. I didn't know how to operate power tools. I didn't know any of the terminology. As a historical fiction writer, it's important to get your facts right and to really dive into the past in order to bring it to the future. So when I started to write Widow 1881 and eventually Tinsmith 1865, I was writing about pioneer women and discovered so much of what they did and where they spent their time was in the kitchen. So over time, I started to do more and more research about pioneer kitchens, American cookware, and how was it made and what was used. Eventually, that became me saying to my husband, I want to start a cookware line. I want it to be American made. Flash forward a few more months, and I decided to do even more research and ended up discovering Bob Bartlemy, who is a traditional tinsmith who lived a few minutes from my home. He was generous enough to take me under his wing, and I ended up going there multiple times a week. In my new book, Copper, Iron, and Clay, A Smith's Journey, I talk about the process of starting a cookware line. I had to ask a lot of questions and screw up and redo things over and over and over again. I will build traditional reproduction cookware that is built exactly the way it has been done since the 1700s. I will also create more modern heavy-duty pieces. I'll do custom designs based on people's specs that they give me. All these machines are originally from the early 1800s, starting about 1810 to 1820s. So they still work, I still use them, and I'm still able to use them to build custom pieces from scratch and everything still works the same as it did 200 years ago. So there's investments, there's fearlessness, and there's asking a lot of questions. And eventually, over time, over mistakes, over trial and error, you can eventually start calling yourself a coppersmith.
多謝收睇美國專訊，下次節目時間再見。